So here's a quick list of things you'll want to buy for this. Obviously, you want to get the OEM trim, brake controller trim. It comes with this installed inside the trim. Next thing you're definitely going to need is the Tow Pro Liberty RedARC brake controller. This was about $145, $150. I believe this was $55. And then you're going to need the Tow Pro insert switch. This is model number X003LYNB13. They call it a universal mount. This one happened to work out for my application. I also bought this mount. This one wouldn't work, so I'm going to send that back. So all in, this costs about just over $200 to get me up and running and get a nice clean look, a nice clean trailer brake installed in my truck. So here's what comes with the Tow Pro Liberty electric brake controller. So they give you this electric brake controller module that'll mount behind your dashboard, out of sight. You get the actual controller with this nice low profile adjustment knob that slides right over this unit. Your retainer washer and retainer nut. And the wiring harness. So this wiring harness is just going to connect this adjustment knob to this control module. From there you'll use these connections on the back to connect to your actual truck's wiring harness. So this is just a quick demo of how everything's going to go together with the parts I have. So I already have the trailer brake controller popped out of here, the OEM trailer brake controller. I have my universal trim that I bought from Amazon. And most importantly, my Tow Pro brake controller. So out of the box, your brake controller comes with all this stuff. The actual control knob, you're going to slide right into the universal trim, just like that. There's a little light that you could see. It's going to stick right through that hole. From there, you're going to take this retainer nut, drop it gently over the knob, and just thread it on to the threads. Nice and gently. Then we're just going to snug it up. I'm just going to make it hand tight. I'm not going to put a wrench on it. I think that would be unnecessary. Make sure everything works. From there, directions say to turn this all the way down to the left and then align your control knob. You can see it has numbers on it with the 0 mark. So you want to align that 0 with this little light right here. And we're just going to gently push it on. That looks pretty close to where it should be. So this right here is pretty much what you're going to end up looking at in your dashboard. I think that's really clean, really low profile. I might take a piece of plastic or something and just cover up this slot so you can't see through it. But even at that, even if I were to leave that open, I think it would still look fine. Your controls, very easily accessible. Turn your brakes up, you can turn your brakes down. It looks almost OEM. So step one to this process is going to be removing the OEM brake controller from this current trim. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my screwdriver and just gently pry up on these two adjustment tabs. Pull them out. It's 1, 2. Pretty simple. They may be a little harder to get out initially. I actually took these out beforehand and then replaced them just to show you guys in the video. Next thing I'm going to do is pry out the actual brake module. So if you look, it's a little bit hard to see. There's a couple retention clips on either side of the component. I'm going to use a flat blade screwdriver again and just work it gently in there. I don't want to really break the tab or anything like this. As I'm working my screwdriver in there, I am applying light pressure to the face of the brake controller, just trying to get it past the little retention pins. That's one side. I'm going to try to hold that and not let them slip back into the pocket. Okay, so now I'm backing on the other side, but the other side did pop back into the clip. So I'm going to press a little bit harder this time. You can see I kind of got that side worked out pretty well. Actually, it looks like if I just continue to push this out gently, I could pop it right out. So now that we have that out, you can kind of see what I'm going for. This, believe it or not, fits almost perfectly in this hole. Center that up nice. A little bit more. You can see we have no gap around the entire trim. The little retention clip on the trim ring actually almost holds it in place. What I'm going to do to hold this permanently, though, is add some JB Weld liquid 2-part epoxy around the edges of this and onto this clip. That's going to keep the clip from sliding back and forth and allowing this trim to move inside this pocket. I think it will work out pretty well, since most of the force applied to this will be pressing back towards the dashboard. Insert this in there, lock it into place. I think I want my light to be on the left-hand side, the driver's side of my dashboard. So I'm going to position it accordingly. Make sure it looks nice and straight in there. It doesn't look crooked or anything like that. And then, so I don't get glue all over the place, I'm going to tape off around this trim. Might move around a little bit on you, so you might have to make a couple adjustments. Make sure you're centered up left to right. I'm not going to measure it. I'm just going to eyeball it. Looks center to me. Looks pretty good. Tape either side. So at this point, we're all taped in. Tape's nice and secure. Brake controller is pretty much centered up. I'm going to pop it out quick. As you can see, we have minimal space around this brake controller for glue. It's going to be a little bit tough actually gluing this in place, but I think we'll be able to accomplish our goal of holding it in there. So I'm going to slide this stuff to the side for now. This is the glue I'm going to be using. I've used this in the past. I've had good results with it. JB Weld, Clear Weld. It's a 5-minute setting. It's 2-part epoxy. Half and half. You mix it together. I usually use a toothpick or a popsicle stick. Something along those lines. Anything to mix it up on a piece of cardboard. And then you apply it. So we'll get started with that. I'm going to use a piece of cardboard to mix it on. Piece of cardboard on the bench. Closest thing I could find in my garage is this small little paintbrush, so I'm going to use this as an applicator. I think it will work out good. Definitely going to squeeze out probably more than I need, but it doesn't really matter. Throw out the extra. Looks like about half and half. And then we just want to thoroughly mix that together. You want to make sure this stuff's mixed very well, because if not, you're not going to get the maximum strength adhesion that you're looking for. After that, I think I got it mixed up pretty nicely. I'm just going to take my brush and I'm going to apply it around the very outside edge of this controller. I'm not going to put a super thick bead on there. I'm going to try to get just enough on there without making a mess around the whole perimeter of this universal trim. So you can kind of see what we're working with now. I went around the entire perimeter, kept it pretty clean. Now I'm gonna drop my brake controller right into the pocket there. Press it down. Make sure we're back in the original position that we had it. The tape kind of gives you a good reference to that. And then I'm going to throw a piece of tape over the top so that we don't have any movement when we flip this over. I can actually see I got a little dab of the JB Weld on the face of this. So I'm just going to grab some denatured alcohol and wipe that off to clean it up so it doesn't dry like that. If you don't have denatured alcohol on hand, I'm sure regular rubbing alcohol would probably also take this stuff off. I'd be careful with other lacquer thinners and stuff like that. They might be a little bit too strong and they could damage the finish on the trim piece. I'm just going to wipe that off all around. Put it back into position. Let that alcohol dry for a minute so that our tape sticks. And I'm going to press straight down on that trim piece and really tape it in there so it doesn't move on us. Pretty much see it behind the tape. Make sure it didn't move on you. Make sure it's not twisted. Still looks straight. Look like we're in a good position. So now I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to take my JB Weld and I'm going to get a nice healthy hunk of it onto the paintbrush. And if you look right inside here, this retainer clip actually almost clips into this OEM trim. So I'm just going to pile it up right on the top edge of that clip. Really work it in there. Press it down. Try to build it up a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. It's a little bit tight getting in there, but with the paintbrush, this is actually working quite well. And then I'm going to go around the whole perimeter again and just really make sure that this thing isn't going to move or slide around on us down the road. I actually used a lot more than I expected. I think I'm going to mix up a little bit more because I really want to make sure this thing doesn't move. I only want to do this one time. Again, mix it up really, really well. I kind of use a cross-hatch motion. Works well for me. Blend it around different directions. Then I kind of go back and try to consolidate it into a pile. And I'm really working it into those corners. Pressing it in there. Trying to get it to build up a little bit. Reason I like this JB Weld clear weld epoxy is it's almost a perfect consistency for stuff like this. It's not too thin, not too thick. It doesn't really flow freely, but it's workable. Some of the other JB Welds are a little bit too thick, and in this application, they'd be tough to work with. So I think this is probably one of the best options for epoxy choices, in my opinion. You may know of something better, but I think this is a pretty good choice. You can see it's almost leveling out in there too. It's really filling that void up. I think this is going to work out really well for us. So one thing you do want to pay attention to that I just noticed I unintentionally did was filled up the slot where the OEM controller's knobs stuck through. So I'm just going to peel back my tape a little bit. Make sure I didn't make a mess up there. You can see I just had a little dab bleed through. So I'm going to also try to clean that up with some alcohol. Get that off before it dries. The alcohol is working extremely well to take this extra JB weld right off there. take a paper towel, wrap it around the tip of a razor blade. It's a little bit tricky. Use that to get right up in the slot. Just continue to wipe it down. Looks to me, kind of see as it's drying, looks to me like I got all of that off. Maybe a little more. To me, that looks pretty much cleaned up. So now I'm just going to let this sit. I'm probably going to let it sit for at least an hour. Make sure that glue really dries up before I even pull the tape off. After that, I'll probably pull the tape off. See if I could clean up any residual glue that might have leaked out around the trim ring. But I don't think we're really going to have any issues with that. So I couldn't find a harness from RedARC that plugs directly into this unit. So what I'm going to do is use these electrical connectors. They're just called 1/4-inch female quick disconnects. I bought the 12 to 10 gauge. I got them at AutoZone. You could buy these at any auto parts store. Home Depot has them. Hardware stores have them. You could order them online. Cheap, about $3.99 for a package, and they'll work for what we need them for. One thing I had to do to make these work was loosen up these two clips a little bit so they would fit around the connectors inside this unit. So you see right now, if I go to fit this in here, it's pretty tight. So I don't want to force it on there and damage the controller. So what I did was took a screwdriver and I just slid it right underneath each one of these tabs. It's a little bit tricky. Once you get it started though, works out. You can see I'm in there now. And I just pull back on it and loosen it up a little. So I do one side and then I'll go back and do the other. Sometimes to get it started, you gotta work the screwdriver in from the top of the clip and kind of wiggle it down. See, I'm in there now. Now you can kind of see from what I originally started with to what I have now. We have a little more space. So this should slide directly on to any one of these tabs now. You might run into a situation like I'm in right now where this is a little wider than it originally was. So I have a pair of pliers for that. I'm just going to take the connector and give it a real gentle pinch. Try to narrow it back out. I don't want to close those back up though. Loosen it a little more. So they still go on pretty snug, which is what you want. You want a good connection. You don't want it loose and sloppy. You don't want them to fall out behind your dashboard. So you want them to go on pretty snug. You have to push a little bit hard still. But, oh, insulation pulled off that time. It's definitely in there well. So I got it back out of there. And now I have 4 of these connectors ready to go. For the 4 ports that are on this controller. Next, I'm going to strip my wires just so I can get the connectors on them. To me, this looks like it's about 14 gauge, so I'm going to start with that on my wire strippers. It looks like we may be a little bigger, so I'm going to go to 12 gauge and see how that works for me. It is in fact 14 like I thought. It's always better to start bigger. That way you don't cut into your wire. So you want about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch of exposed wire. I'm going to strip every one so they're all ready to go. Your black wire and your white and blue wire are a bit smaller. They look to me like they are either 16 or 18 gauge. So again, I'm going to start with 16. 16 doesn't do anything and move up to 18. 18 still is a little bit too big, so I'm going to go down to the next slot. It's probably a 20 gauge wire. Straighten out all my wires. Start with the blue one. Hold it in place, and then I have my crimpers. And we're going to crimp it. Give it a nice light tug. You don't want to pull too hard. Make sure it's in there well. That's definitely in there. Next, I'm going to go to my green and red wire. Give it a little twist to make sure all the strands are together. Slide your connector on there. And again, come in with your crimper. And slowly apply pressure. Give it a tug, make sure it's in there. Honestly, these connectors are a little big for the white wire and the black wire, but we're going to have to make them work because we need to use this size connector to connect to the control module. So we might have to press a little harder with our wire crimpers on these two. That's in there solid. The last wire is the white wire. This is the one I lost the insulation on, so I'm going to slide it back in there. Again, hold it in place and crimp. So now we've just made ourselves a wiring harness that will plug directly into our truck's OEM wiring harness. So at this point we want to refer to our instruction manual that came with our RedARC Tow Pro controller, and we want to find out what each of these terminals is so we can match these terminals up to the truck's wiring harness. So if you open the manual up, you'll see a section with dimensions and connections. See if my camera will focus in on this. So if you look at this, it's telling us that all the way to the left, we have the brake lights. Second in from the left, we have the brake output, blue. We have the ground earth wire, white, and then the input power wire, black. So we'll start with our black wire. This is where you want to be careful because they're telling us that the input power wire is black, but on our truck's harness, it's telling us that our black wire is the brake ground. And our red and green wire is our power wire. So our red and green wire is going to go to the terminal, if you're looking at the top of the unit, all the way to the right-hand side. Press that in there, make sure it's fully engaged onto the terminal, and you're good. Next, we have our ground earth wire, which is white according to this manual, but we're going to check our truck's harness, and that's telling us that our ground wire is black. So we're going to take our black wire and connect it to the terminal second from the right. Our next wire is going to be our brake output. On our truck wiring harness, our brake output is dark blue. That leaves us with one wire, a white wire, but we're still going to check and see what our wiring harness says that wire goes to. So our white and blue wire, this wire is white and blue, is our brake signal wire. And our last terminal is our brake light wire, so which is also your brake signal wire. So as you can see, that's a pretty solid. Give that a solid tug. Make sure none of the wires are going to come out. Nothing's going to pull off. But that's a pretty solid connection. I don't think you have to worry about those falling out behind your dashboard. It's clean and it'll do the trick. So our next step, we're going to prep our trim piece with our brake controller. It's pretty simple. you're just going to take the brake controller, look at where your light is. If you can see, there's a little LED light. You want to align that LED light with that hole right there. So you're going to slide it in from the back side of the trim. Make sure you're all aligned, hold it in place, and you're going to take your retainer nut, slip it over the top, and just tighten it down. I'm just going to pinch it with my hands, make sure it's hand tight. From there, it's not going to go anywhere. This is solid. It's in there well. Check out our epoxy job. Then we're going to turn this all the way counterclockwise, like the instructions say. And we're going to add the actual brake controller control knob. Now they tell you to put this on so that the 0 aligns with the LED light after you have turned this dial completely counterclockwise. So we're going to align that with the 0. We're right in line with the light and press it on there. And you can see once it's on, and if it's in the correct position, you could go from 0 and it should stop when you get to 10. So that seemed to have worked out perfectly. So now that our trim piece is 100% assembled, all we have left to do on the bench is connect this to the back of our trim. I'm going to use the angled connection just because I think it's going to give me a little bit more room behind my dashboard. So you have a little locking tab there. You just want to align that with your connector. At this point, I would probably still hold your trim since the epoxy is still drying. It probably doesn't fully cure for at least 24 hours, so I'm just going to put some pressure on there as I push the connector in from the other side, and it clicks right in. We're good to go. This end will connect directly to your control module, but for right now we're going to leave it disconnected until we get this all installed inside the truck behind the dashboard. So our first step when we get inside the truck is to remove our original trim piece that doesn't have the brake control. The OEM brake controller would be mounted right in this pocket. So we're going to swap this whole piece out for this piece that we just made. So this is actually held in by what I believe is 4 snap connectors. Instead of just taking this trim piece out, it seems to be easier to take this whole assembly that wraps around the vent and everything out. So we'll start with that, and from there we'll try to separate the vent trim from the actual controller trim. So this was a little bit of a pain to get out. It has 4 connectors on it, 2 on the top, 1 on the side, and then 1 that comes in from the side of the dashboard. So I popped the 3 connectors that go through the face first, and then I was able to pull it sideways and release. Now I'm going to connect these 3 connectors that go to the back of the trim. So for this step, I came back to the bench. You can see that the control trim is held in with multiple metal snap connectors. To get these off in the truck would have definitely been tough. And then we also have to pull these two four-wheel drive controller and the headlight controller out and install them into our new trim. I'm just going to try to release these clips, at least a few of them, with my pliers, maybe loosen them up at least a little bit. See, that made quite the difference. Now I can at least get started on separating these two pieces. You want to be careful not to crack anything here. It's in there pretty well. Put some pressure on the back side of the clips. That helps too. And there it is. After that, we're going to use the same method to get these out as we did to get the original OEM brake controller module out of the new trim. Take my flat blade screwdriver and slide it in one side. And apply light pressure. I'm going to go back and forth a couple times. So as you can see, we got our four-wheel drive controller out. We'll snap it right directly into our new trim. Make sure we got good movement. It's all set. And we'll move on to our next control. So there you have it. There is your new trim piece, all ready to be installed. So at this point, I've ran my wire from our actual brake controller knob down into the fuse box. I found this nice small hole right here that I was able to run the wire through and get it up under the dashboard. You can see that I have the other end of it right here. Right now I have the control module laying on the floor. The other end that plugs into the truck harness is plugged in behind this box right here. I have tons of extra wire. If I were to go back and do this again, I probably would have cut this a bit shorter. But at this point, I'll just spool this up, tape it together, tuck it up under the dashboard, and be done with it. To secure the brake controller, the control module, I'm going to use some Velcro, some nice strong Velcro, and I'm going to stick it up. This is going to be hard to show on a video. I'm going to stick it on the opposite side of this box. There's a nice flat surface. There's another wire junction box on the opposite side up here. The tips of my fingers are touching it right now. It's got plenty of room to mount the brake controller unit to, and I think it will be a great place where it's out of the way but still accessible if need be. So now that we have our dashboard open up, I could actually show you what would be the OEM brake controller wiring harness. So this is actually behind your dashboard with the original trim with the pocket like I initially had in here. The thing is, if you hook your OEM brake controller like the one I bought up to this, and your truck did not originally come with an OEM brake controller installed in your dashboard here, this connector won't do anything. Your computer actually needs to be updated or flashed or replaced to accept this brake controller, and that's why essentially we had to go with a aftermarket unit.